And now a little bit about creating pivot tables and pivot charts. Pivot tables allow you to analyze numeric data in depth. You can use this tool to answer unanticipated questions about data. Pivot tables are interactive, cross-tabulated Excel reports that summarize and analyze your data. In this module, you'll learn how to insert a pivot table using Excel recommendations. You'll also learn how to choose fields and group data to create different types of pivot tables. You'll gain an understanding of the Pivot Table Tools tab. You'll also learn how to change the data displayed and refresh the table. And you'll learn how to create a pivot chart, both from an existing pivot table and straight from data. And finally, we'll look at some real-life examples of using pivot tables and pivot charts. So let's get started. Now let's learn how to insert a pivot table. First, open your worksheet that has the data. Make sure the data is in a good format with no blanks and spaces, otherwise you may need to highlight the data you want to analyze. Select the Insert tab from the ribbon, and then we'll select for this example the recommended pivot tables. Excel will display the recommended pivot tables dialog box, and you can select the pivot table you want to use from the choices on the left side of the dialog box, and you'll see a preview on the right. And then simply click OK. Excel will display the pivot table on a new worksheet. It really is that simple. Now we'll go into more detail as to how to display the data in your pivot table. The Pivot Table Fields pane includes tools to help you choose which fields you'd like to include on your report. You can also change the presentation of columns, rows, and values of your pivot table. There are 4 areas of the Pivot Table Fields pane for grouping that allow you to drag the fields to get the presentation that you want. To add or remove fields to or from the pivot table report, we're going to check the box next to the field listed in the Pivot Table Fields pane to include it in the report. Clear the box to remove it. The default location where fields are added is as follows. Non-numeric fields are added to the row labels. Numeric fields are added to the values area. Date and time values are added to the column labels. Now you can move these later and we'll show you how, but those are the defaults. You can also apply a filter or sorting to one or more fields by selecting the small arrow to the far right of the field name. The bottom of the Pivot Table Field List pane includes 4 areas: filters, rows, columns, and values. But now let's talk about how to group the data. Let's right-click on a field label in the Pivot Table Field List and select one of the options from the context menu that opens. We can also simply drag the fields from one area to another. One last thing to note before you practice this is you may have noticed that the Pivot Table Tools tab appears when you insert your pivot table. These contextual tabs are used throughout Office 2013 and newer versions. The appropriate tab appears depending on which type of object you're using. Now go and do your pivot table exercise to get some practice, and we'll come back and show you some more details about pivot tables. Pivot tables are meant to be interactive, so Excel makes it easy to change the data. You can select the Refresh tool at any time to update the table. So let's see how to do this. Return to the worksheet containing the pivot table. Click somewhere on the pivot table. Select the Analyze tab from the ribbon and select Refresh. Now at any time when your data is changed, you may want to do this refresh motion just to make sure that the data is updated in the table. Now let's talk about changing the data source. Maybe you've set up a table and it's exactly how you want it laid out, but now you have a different set of data, say from a different month or a different department. Select the Pivot Table Tools Analyze tab from the ribbon and select Change Data Source. Excel returns to the worksheet of the source data and highlights the current data source. It also displays the Change Pivot Table Data Source dialog box. So simply highlight the new data area on the worksheet. This could be a new tab, a different worksheet that you've brought into this table, whatever. Once you've selected in that dialog box your new data list, click OK. Excel will open the new pivot table, and now you can select and group the fields as desired. You can add a chart expressing the results of a pivot table at any time. A pivot chart report can help you visualize pivot table report summary data to make comparisons or see patterns and trends. When you insert a pivot chart, you're also automatically inserting a pivot table. A pivot chart report must be in the same workbook as its associated pivot table report. If you insert a standard chart for the pivot table data, the chart will be a pivot chart. Okay, so let's see it in action. So to add a pivot chart from an existing pivot table, we're going to click anywhere in the pivot table, select the Pivot Table Tools Analyze tab from the ribbon, and select Pivot Chart. Excel will display the Insert Chart dialog box. Simply select the desired type of chart and click OK. To insert a pivot chart from data, meaning we didn't already have a pivot table set up, we're going to place our cursor somewhere in the data that you'd like to analyze, select the Insert tab from the ribbon, and select Pivot Chart. Excel displays the Create Pivot Chart dialog box. Excel automatically provides a range of cells based on your selection. You can change that table or range if desired. Select the location for the pivot chart. You can have Excel create a new worksheet or select one of the existing sheets in your workbook, and click OK. Excel displays the blank pivot chart and the Fields pane for you to begin choosing your fields and grouping data. So simply add fields to view the chart. So that's a little bit about how to create a pivot chart either with an existing pivot table or with a data source. Next, we'll talk about some real-life examples. Many people shy away from pivot tables because they seem so complex. However, pivot tables are a really powerful tool to aggregate your data or view it in different ways. So let's look at a few real-life examples to really help you show how easy pivot tables can be. You'll use the real-life example1.xlsx file that's in this module for this practice. So if you don't have it open, go ahead and download that now and open it. But what we're going to do is actually practice while I'm talking you through it. So with this example open, I'm going to have you find out the sum of payments for each client. And then we're going to find the sum of payments by month. So placing the cursor somewhere in your data, you're going to go to Insert Pivot Table. In the Pivot Table Fields pane, we need to select the payment and the client. So simply check those boxes so those fields are showing. If they don't already show in the way you'd like them, let's either click and drag the client to the rows, and then grab the payment field, and if it's not already showing in the values for you, click and drag it to the values area. Now your table should look like this. Now let's do the payments by month. So with the sum of payments by month, we're going to uncheck the client field and then check the month field. The payments are already a part of the field tables that we've selected. So we'll simply make sure that we have the month in the row area and that our payments are still showing in the value area. And then your pivot table should look like this. Practice these two because not only is it going to help you learn about pivot tables, but these are pretty typical scenarios that I see with my clients. They usually like to sum things up, either invoices, payments, sales, revenue, whatnot, by month and or by client. So these are real life examples. Now go do your practice and we'll come back for some more real life examples in a moment. For this example, you'll need to download and open the Real Life Example 2 XLSX spreadsheet. So we want to find out what are the order amounts for each salesperson. So if we don't already have the pivot table, we're going to click so that we're somewhere in our data, choose Insert Pivot Table. And then in our Pivot Table Fields pane, we're going to check Salesperson and Order Amount. If they don't automatically appear in the correct location, you want to click and drag so that the salesperson name or the fields appear in the rows area, and then the sum of the order amounts should be in the value section. So let's say we'd like to find out who are the top 10 salesmen. We can click the arrow next to the row labels and select More Sort options. This is a really useful tool that a lot of people don't understand or don't even know exists with pivot tables. In the Sort dialog box, we'll select Ascending, which is alphabetically A to Z. With numbers, it'll be smallest to largest, by sum of order amount, and then select OK. So now we'll see the top salespeople or the salespeople via order amounts listed in order. Again, do your practice exercise and you'll get better and better at pivot tables.